Well, how's everyone doing this morning? Good, good. So for those of you who I don't know, my name is Wesley Campbell, and Stacy was here last night. We've been going to be coming in for our 39th wedding anniversary in November. We have just 5 children, and expecting our first grandchild this next month, so it's going to be great. We're from British Columbia, Canada, which is way across the nation, and just up from Seattle, Vancouver, 4 hours east of Vancouver. That's where we were raised, but we're working now at the Santa Maria Healing Rooms. Previously the home of Paul Kane Ministries. So that's where we just came from. We'll be tomorrow. And Stacy and I have been admiring Jeff and Janet Jansen from afar for many years, but you know, we just, you swirl and you pass, and so here we are today.
Here we are.
And James Goll, we've been friends and comrades in arms for, you know, many decades. So what we want to do this morning, and really for the day, because James is here today as well, is review and crystallize what the prophets have said over the past, you know, 45 years, 70 years, concerning the day you're living in today. What Jeff said up at the front there about now and the now word, it's absolutely true. When Daniel realized from the books, from the prophecy of Jeremiah, that the time allotted was to be 70 years, he said, I set myself to pray and fast and to seek the face of God and to call for the fulfillment of a 70-year prophecy of Jeremiah that the Jews would go back to Israel and rebuild the temple. And he began to pray, and literally angels were moving, Gabriel was moving, and he was taking hold of the past words for the present move of God. And that's really what we are doing right now. This last few years have been an amazing time, and we're going to be drawing on that, but it's not about the past as much as it's about you playing your role in the present and in the future. And I saw these little girls and little kids up here. I thought, wow, what if we were only 10 again? What if we were 10? They get to be 10. Now we're the older guys, right? So I'm going to introduce the topic. Then I'm going to interview Jeff a little bit, you know, and bring from some of his prophetic history together. And we want to also mention the Billion Soul Harvest Word, and we're going to end with the Paul Kane IC Stadium's prophecy that he gave in Anaheim, 1989. So, just to begin, in 1975, Bob Jones, who was a prophet, where was he born? Arkansas? In Arkansas. So that means he has an accent. Yep. Now, he had an encounter in August 1975. So think about that, 75, that's almost 45 years ago. And by the way, we have all of these encounters and prophecies on this USB. There's 15 or 16 albums plus others, but his life death one is on there, recorded where we were, put to music. It's about a 15-minute. So Bob was told by a demonic spirit to stop prophesying. He rebuked the spirit, and the spirit threatened him, left, and a few days later he was struck with a pain in his lower abdomen as he was working. He went to the hospital. They didn't know what it was. He knew what it was. He knew it was demonic. He went home to pray. I'm taking a 20-minute story to make it 2 minutes or less. And he started to pray fervently. The pain increased. And then this abscess or cyst ruptured in his stomach. Blood, he said, spewed out of his mouth, out of his nose. He wrapped a towel around his head, laid on the bed, and suddenly he was in great pain. His spirit disconnected from his body, raised in the room, and he looked at his own body on the bed, and his first thought was, I wonder how they do that. I was serving Jesus. And he literally died on his bed, August 1975. He began to float up through the atmosphere, through the roof, in Kansas City, Missouri. And he found himself in paradise, where Jesus was. He was on what was like a conveyor belt. He was moving towards Jesus. Many people were in front of him. Jesus would pause them and look them in the eye and say, one question, did you learn how to love? And they would have to answer that question. And he said they had many answers. He said one old lady that was bent up with, arthritis. She said, only you, Lord, only you. And he said she was a mean one, but she got in. And so he said, as the crowd was coming towards Jesus, and he was moving closer, he says, they would kiss, Jesus would kiss them on the lips, and they would go through his heart like great big double doors into paradise. So he says, I was coming, and he says, I was getting ready. I puckered up. But he said, Jesus put his hand and said, no, Bob, wait. It's not your time. And then Bob said, interactions, funny ones, and Jesus said, now look over there. And there was another crowd of people going, as it were, on an escalator away from Jesus. And they would have one opportunity to look him in the eye, and they knew that this was true, and they would go into outer darkness. And they were wrapped up in the things that they had served while on earth. Jesus said, would you go back for them? Bob said, I'd go back for one soul. Jesus said, I'm not sending you back for one soul, but to prepare my leaders for a harvest of 1 billion souls. 1 billion souls. And if you know, the population of the earth at that time was about 4.2 billion at that time, in the 70s. Jesus touched his body, the power of God went through him, and he found himself going back, as it were, through the space into his house. He watched over his body as 2 resurrection angels were prophesying and touching his body and ministering. And one just went like that. Now it begins. And they pointed to the center of Kansas City. There was like an atomic explosion of light. And it was the prayer movement that would go around the world. And he was now back in his body. That was 1975. 1975. And so he began to prepare with hundreds of prophecies concerning a youth movement that would come to Kansas City. And of course, later Mike Bickle would be the apostolic leader of that. James would be there, many others. And he had about, let's just say, hundreds of prophecies concerning that. I remember in 1989, the Easter Conference, Passion for Jesus. We came from British Columbia, Canada. And in those days, my background raised as Plymouth Brethren, which is John Nelson Darby, very fundamentalist sect that came out of Ireland, in the 1800s. I'm 5 generations. And they're pretty much against everything. And I had no grid for an end-time revival concept that God would actually save the earth. I mean, mine was toilet bowl theology. That's where, you're in the toilet bowl, the devil's flushing it, and you're going, ah! And as you go around and around the bowl, you're just about to be sucked down. The angel Gabriel blows his trumpet, and you're snatched out of there with just a few pieces of toilet paper.
That's a rough spot right there. That's a rough spot.
And you make it. You made it. You just made it. So I walked in to Kansas City, and I mean, and that was outrageous. There was, Mike was leading it, but James was there. Rick Joyner was preaching.
What year was
1989.
1989.
Leonard Ravenhill was there. Francis Frangipan. I mean, it just went on and on and on and on. And I heard for the first time the concept of global end time revival. The concept. It's 89. So we began to study into that whole thing and really push in. I would say that this one prophecy has been a guiding light in our life. But the beauty is that today, what Jeff said this morning, is we're right now on the cusp of the dramatic fulfillment of what has been prophesied, both from the 75, but also from the latter rain, as we've experienced the leaders of those that were the last fathers of the latter rain. We'll come to that in a bit. Of Paul Cain and others have now passed on in the Spirit, and in the Spirit, it's the next wave. So with that, we're going to go into Bob Jones first, but before we do that, Jeff, some of them don't know you the way that your church here knows you. So you came to Christ in a dramatic way.
I did.
Year, where, place, how did that happen?
I came to Christ in 1977 through the Charismatic Renewal in 1977, 1978 through the Charismatic Renewal in like the Green Bay, Wisconsin area. And I shared this on Sid Roth years ago, but I had an incredible visitation. I got saved by tongue-talking, Catholics. Catholics, Spirit-filled Catholics, Charismatic Renewal. I was 16 years old. Long story short, just trying to skip through. Tongue-talking, prophesying Catholics.
You had ants in your pants.
I had ants in my pants. There weren't any schools of the supernatural. There wasn't any of those. Nothing like that. So I was just hungry for Jesus. I was playing guitar. And
so you came in and suddenly you were just awakened. It was the 70s, tail end of the Jesus movement. You were awakened. Yeah. But then you just pushed into God, pushed in. You had a dramatic visitation. Describe that.
Incredible visitation. It was right before I was to be married in 1981. I was 18 years old. It was February. I was seeking God in my new apartment. In my new apartment, and it was like a kitchenette. Had a small little bedroom here, little kitchenette in between, and we were to be married April 30th, and it was February, so I'm there preparing and getting everything ready. And so what happened was I'd been in a long season of it's just me and Jesus. Again, there's no schools of the supernatural. There's nothing going on. I was just hungry for Jesus. I thought everybody did it. I'm worshiping the Lord. The Lord's talking to me. I'm talking to Him, weeping, crying. The Holy Ghost is all over me. He would talk to me and show me all kinds of things, and show me the nations. And I'm like, I'm just a little Catholic kid, Spirit-filled. A couple of years old in the Lord, and you're showing. I don't even know what this means. One night in February in Wisconsin, cold, right? The Lord shows up about 3 o'clock in the morning in my bedroom. Waves of glory.
Now, had you been sleeping?
I was sleeping. I was dead asleep. And I was awakened by waves.
So then you came awake.
I came awake, and on the back of my bedroom wall, there was a shimmering light.
So you see this with your eyes?
I see this with my physical eyes.
Okay.
And I'm thinking it's got to be the street light, new bedroom, right? New hotel, or new apartment. But there's no window in the back of my back here. There was no window in the room. It was just shimmering light. And I'm thinking, where's this light coming from? And as I'm thinking about it, I'm feeling the love of God just rocking me. It turns into a rainbow. And I'm thinking, there's a rainbow in my back wall in the power of God. The love of God is just sweeping over me. And I'm thinking, where's this rainbow come? It's got to be a prism, and it's light refracting. I'm trying to figure it out in the natural. Not happening. And while I'm trying to figure this out, I see this hand, and it literally had a feather. It was a pen, and it wrote in supernatural light, I love you, Jeff. And it was the Lord. It was the Lord in the promise of the rainbow. And I'm thinking, I'm seeing my name in lights in the promise on my back wall. Catholic kid saved 2 years. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Am I dreaming? And I know I'm not dreaming. And as I'm looking at it, thinking about this, just weeping as the love of God is rocking me, it turns into a stadium.
So the wall now turns into a massive stadium.
That rainbow turns into a stadium, and it's a television on my back wall, because the Lord is telling a vision about what my ministry is going to be. And I'm looking at the stadium, and I'm seeing fireworks coming out of the top of the stadium. And every time it does, it wasn't just the explosion of fireworks, it had healing in Jesus' name. Hallelujah! Miracles. And every time it did, the whole stadium would go. And I don't know anything about stadium ministry, I know nothing about it. And I'm watching this happening. I'm weeping as the love of God is just rocking me. And the next thing that happened was it's like the Lord turned the channel, and I saw myself standing in a stadium, or saw myself standing in a crusade ground, in a ground in Africa, because it's like 100,000 people, and I'm seeing black faces, and I see myself standing on stage, and there's a band, and there's a man that's laying on the stage, and he's dead, and I literally watched myself.
Jesus.
I watched myself walk up to that man, stand over the top of that man, and rebuke the spirit of death in Jesus' name. And the man got up, and the crowd went, and people came forward and gave their lives to Christ. The Lord was showing me the essence of my ministry, which we are doing crusades, and we've done stadiums, and we're going to do even more stadiums. So that all happened.
Now, so you saw the hand, you saw a feather, you saw the rainbow, you saw like a television.
Right.
Did you see Jesus, any more of him?
I didn't see, no.
Okay.
But that was the Lord.
And this lasted for what, an hour?
I don't even know. It seemed like forever.
And it indelibly marked you.
Yeah, it indelibly marked.
And fast forward 82 or so, you meet John Wimber and you meet Lonnie Frisbee.
Yep.
Lonnie Frisbee activates you.
Yep, I went to Brooklyn, New York. We were working with Teen Challenge, David Wilkerson, and I was there viewing the program. And what happened was, this was like months after I had this encounter, so we're there viewing the program because we did a lot of stuff on the streets. And this hippie van, that's probably the best way I know how to explain it, showed up, and they had this whole group of people came from South Africa. This white-haired guy named John Wimber, and this other long-haired freak, you know, with a leather jacket, Lonnie Frisbee, and about 70 other people, young people that had just been saved, and they were coming back from South Africa talking about crusades that they had done there, and the miracles that happened. And Lonnie walked right up to me and said, "Hey," because I had my guitar with me, I was a worship leader. He said, "We're going to do a bunch of meetings in Brooklyn. You and this white-haired guy, you're going to lead worship, and I'm going to preach." I was like, okay, whatever. It's God's setup. So we did 5 nights of miracle meetings, and I saw things happen. Literally, John was singing songs like "In His Time." I mean, this was John Wimber before he was John Wimber.
Who managed and produced the Righteous Brothers back in the 70s.
Yeah, so that was John, and I'm leading worship with this. I just got thrown into the mix. And 5 nights of miracles, 5 nights of incredible things, and I saw things. I didn't even know if I believed what I was seeing, you know. I didn't even know if I believed it, but there were people, there were demons coming out of people on the floor manifesting. And on the last night, Lonnie, we're leading worship. Lonnie, he turned to me on stage. Dave Wilkerson's there, Don Wilkerson, all the, you know, all those guys are there, and 400 or 500 people. And he said, "Jeff, you've been running from God." I said, "I'm running from God. I'm standing here with my guitar, you know, on stage." He said, "Come here." So I took my guitar off, put it down, and I remember walking over to him. It was so surreal, and I got to about 4 or 5 feet from Lonnie. Now you need to understand, he was the catalyst behind the Jesus movement. He was the guy. Jesus movement.
Southern California.
Southern California, Calvary Chapel, the Jesus People movement. This is Lonnie, a miracle working machine. You know, I walked up there, I got about 5 feet from him, and I stopped because the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And he said, "Don't worry, that won't hurt you." He said, "That's the Holy Spirit." He said, "Come here." And I took a few steps further, and I was electrified. He said, "Stick your hands up." So I stuck my hands up. And when I did, it was like I got whacked with a 220. He never touched me. And it was like electric power. And I shook and shook and shook, and that's the last thing I remember. And I shook for weeks and months after that. But something happened. That was my connection. But he prophesied my healing ministry. He prophesied my international ministry. I'm 18 years old, Catholic kid, saved a couple of months. He prophesied everything that Jesus showed me in the vision on my back wall.
Amen.
So that was my introduction to John Wimber, Lonnie Frisbee.
And just as a side note, Blaine Cook, who was one of the early pioneers in the Vineyard movement, the exact same thing happened to him in California, and, you know, and he met Lonnie, and Lonnie pointed to him. He was thrown on the ground, convulsed violently for hours, and went into a 3 to 4 month period of just weeping, led over, you know, 100, 200 people in his corporation to Jesus, signs and wonders. And this was happening all over the place in those days. But the point of that is that many of these people are now the fathers and the senior fathers and mothers that it was to prepare the leaders for the move of the billion soul harvest. So we're going to fast forward now. You're going to go on to YouTube and you can watch all sorts of stories about Bob Jones, find out who he is, Paul Cain, find out who they are. But what many of you don't know is the last hours of Bob Jones' life. We were happened to be in Lindale, Texas preaching. It was February 14th, 2014. And that morning we heard the news that Bob Jones had just gone into the presence of Jesus. On February 14th, of course, Valentine's Day. Why? Because he always said, "I'm his Valentine." And he always says, "I'm getting prettier every day." And you had to see Bob to understand the beauty of that.
He would say, I'm the Lord's favorite.
No. But I don't know who got that from who. If he got that from Bickle, or if Bickle got that from him. Because, I mean, I go back in that whole period of time. I was walking off all these guys at that period of time. And Bickle was the banding rooster, Mike Bickle. And Bob saw Mike Bickle before Mike would come. And the Lord said to Bob back in that period of time, he said, there'll be a banding rooster. Banty rooster.
Yeah.
He would strut, in other words. He'd strut, okay? And that when he appears on the scene, that you're to abandon what you're doing, you're to join yourself to that young man who will carry, you know, revival, worship, and the prophetic.
And intercession.
And intercession, yeah, intercession and prophetic. But so I go back to that whole period. In '83 was when I had a dramatic visitation, you know, as well, as right in that period of time.
Okay, so and James is going to be sharing a whole bunch more of this today. Today is it's almost like our prophetic history day for the future. And you don't want to miss this. You want to get your videos going and everything. Okay, so now just coming up to the time when Bob is going to go, you know, tell about his body, what's going on.
We'll do that, but talk about what happened just real quick, just for those that are watching. 1983. Do you want to do that real quick? Yeah, you do that real quick. What happened in 1983 with Bob Jones? Talking about just in a nutshell, what happened with the Kansas City Fellowship.
Well, I met Bob in 1983, and I had already prayed for 10 years every day for the School of the Prophets to come forth from 1972 to 1983. And then Mike Bickle had moved, as was shown to Bob, and Mike moves from St. Louis to Kansas City. And then he was, I don't remember how old at that time, like 26 or something. And then he calls forth the Joel's Army fast in the month of May. What was it, like May 6th? What was the day of visitation when the Lord showed up to William Branham?
That was May the 7th, 1940.
Yeah. So this is the same time frame as when the Lord appeared. See, God has a calendar. God knows the calendar. And God keeps the calendar. And so in the same time frame, when the angel of the Lord showed to Bill Branham, then William Branham, and then on that day, then Mike Bickle calls forth for a 21-day, he called it Joel's Army Fast. I'm pastoring in Warrensburg, Missouri, which was an hour and a half away, and then Mike was holding these, 3 prayer meetings a day. And so then Michael Ann and I then go to Kansas City, and there's going to be a time to have prayer. And so we're there. There's Bob Jones. There was another guy named Augustine Akala, who was the other early prophet before Paul came and before Bob Jones, before John Paul Jackson, with Mike in Kansas City. So there was Bob Jones, there was Augustine Akala, and there was some woman. And so then we go there. It's the 21 days of prayer and fasting. It was amazing. That was the first time Bob laid his hands on us. And Michael Ann was pregnant by a miracle through the healing ministry of Jesus, through Mahashabda. Bob discerned, prophesies over our son Justin in Michael Ann's womb, and he speaks some profound things to me. That's the whole 1983 time frame. But then Mike had moved to Kansas City, already had a gathering anointing. Young people were streaming then to him, prayer, fasting, seeking God, and believing the revival was imminent, was at any moment at that time frame.
Yeah. So there were many things. We're just skipping over the tops of the mountains right now. But it was Bob Jones, and I was talking with Stacy about this yesterday. Bob Jones brought the prophetic words to IHOP, to Mike Bickle, before it was IHOP in the Kansas City Fellowship. Bob brought most of the prophetic words about that formed all of what happened about the Kansas City prophets and about IHOP and everything that was going to happen. Song of Solomon for Mike Bickle, all of these things. Bob was a Papa Prophet too, the Papa Prophet too. What happened with Kansas City, and that's important to know. And by the way, when the Lord sent back Bob in August the 8th, 1975 from death, he said, you're going to go back for a 1 billion soul harvest, but you're also going to go back. And Bob told me this personally. He said, you will go back you will raise up a company of prophets.
Yeah.
You're going to raise up a company of prophets that will impact the world. And those prophets were dispersed, and then there was another ring of prophets, and I'm part of that ring, and there's other rings, and there's something else that's happening now, but we'll get into that a little bit. So you asked about the last 12 hours.
So just and you want to go on to mikebickle.org and watch, and also it's on there, 7 hours of all these stories with transcripts. So you have to read this because it's going to give you faith. The angel said to William Branham, if you can get the people to believe, if they will just believe, nothing will be impossible. So we're telling you stories from 40 years, 45 years, and it's all, you know, as Mike said, or as Bob said to Mike, he says, you're going to have 24/7 prayer and worship and intercession. No one even knew what that meant. You're going to pray for Israel. He says, the Asians are going to watch prayers coming out of Kansas City with televisions, small television sets with no plugs. They're going to watch it on their wrist.
So, I was in many of those gatherings firsthand, so I know the stuff firsthand, not just second or third hand. So there is we're doing real fast, so there's a little bit of jumbling. This happened then, this happens later, and all that. But Bob was given 3 signs that would happen before the billion soul harvest would begin. And the 3 signs, and he does this publicly, and people didn't have a clue what Bob was talking about. And even when Bob shares this first time, people, it was like, because the first thing was that Bob said was there'll be an abortion pill will be perfected, that, you know, through a pill that women will have abortions. And Mike Bickle and the crew, looked like during the interviews, didn't even think Bob even knew what the word abortion meant. And so, and this is like in the 83, 84 period of time. And so that was one of the signs. So first of all, I want to say, those are negative signs in that sense.
Yeah.
But if we'll wait, the third one was extremely positive. And so the first one was about a pill would be perfected for abortions. The second sign was that gender confusion would happen in the nation, and that same-sex, not just attraction, same-sex marriage would become legal. Now, of course,
promoted.
Yeah. Legal obviously opens the door that it's beyond promoted, and so it would permeate the culture. Okay, so that has happened. But the third thing that Bob said was this, and that was positive. He said, laborers in the rice fields of China will be watching 24/7, 365 worship on unplugged television sets on their wrist. Now you got to understand the depth of all of that work. It said in China, number one. Number two, that type of technology was not, nobody was even conceiving that type of stuff. The phrase is just profound. It is. Because you have to use your terminology at the moment to try to describe something that's futuristic. And he said, laborers in the rice fields of China. China, okay guys, it was a communist country, still is, but there was no freedom. There was, the house church movement there was just actually beginning to emerge. Laborers in the rice fields in China will watch what? 24/7, 365 worship on what? Unplugged television sets on their wrist. Wow. They're smartwatches. Wow. I was in New Jersey at the King of Kings with that couple there, and I'm telling this story. This guy is a Wall Street, the co-senior leader is a Wall Street trader. He takes his smartwatch off, throws it up on the platform to me, which I typically wear it every day. And he gives it to me as a sign of a fulfillment that it was now the beginnings of, because the third sign had come. They were sequence of 3 signs of what? Of when it would begin. Now people misinterpret this one too. The beginning, not the fullness of the harvest. The beginning of the 1 billion soul harvest, especially of youth. The other thing that also gets mistold or interpreted by people is that Bob would see it all himself. What Bob was told was that he would anoint the leaders. Now, because again, I was like these guys in a lot of behind the scenes, not just the public. But the way I understand it, then by conversation, was that Bob would be used as one of the people to anoint the leaders who would become fathers and mothers, who would become the grandfathers and the grandmothers. And it would be 3 generations in a generation, 3 generations in a generation, then that would see. Now, I'm going to interject and say, we see in part, we know in part, we prophesy in part, and we exalt the word about a 1 billion soul harvest. I personally have come to this conviction. That is not the final harvest. That will be the greatest harvest that the earth have seen to that point in time. But I don't believe personally anymore. I have prayed into this for a long time. I don't believe anymore that Bob saw the final harvest. Bob saw the great harvest, is the way you would call it, the greatest harvest unto that point in time. I don't believe it's the final. I believe it's the greatest to that time, and then it prepares the way for another greater outpouring and harvest that is literally global in Jesus' name.
I completely agree with that. And that is 100%.
So we come to the last day.
No, it's so important, folks, that we don't limit this prophetic revelation to 1 billion souls. Okay, because like how many have actually come in? Well, a lot already. So I'm just going to be here to declare we honor, but we build on. That becomes a floor to the next generation's ceiling, or the ceiling to the floor. And then because I don't believe, because now it's like when he gave the word, there was only 4 billion people in the earth. 4.1 billion. Well, there's like 7, 8 billion or whatever now. And so let's say maybe 3 billion. Let's triple it, because it's going to be a great harvest that's going to lead to a greater, perhaps, final harvest.
Amen.
Come on.
So let's go down. So Bob is about 85, 86. He's in his last hours, the last 24 hours of his life. And you are privy to really what happened, what took place. Go for it.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to it. We don't want to get into all of the, all the things that happened. There's a lot here. And for the sake of time, I want to talk about the last 12 hours. Okay. And I was a part of a group of 12 prophets, and that have come together by vision and by dream. I didn't even know some of these, but we were put together on a council, and really to talk. And Bonnie was one of those. Bonnie Jones was one of those. And Rick Joyner, he's in on the whole mix. So anyways, long story short is this. No, Robert was not, but there's so many that are coming in now. So here's what happened.